I floated it out there for you guys again to pick the topic for this March Madness video. And there were a lot of different suggestions, some of which are already video topics for later this month. If you want to see what is actually scheduled for this month, go to the OTRS Central March video schedule so that way you can see what all is coming up. So there were all types of different suggestions for this, and I was having trouble deciding what I really wanted to talk about. But there was a video I had planned on doing in the month of February that I ultimately didn't get around to. And it seemed like enough people, especially on Facebook, wanted me to talk about Chris Benoit. Now, I know just about everybody that's anybody has already done a video or videos about this topic in the past, what have you. But I never really have. And I've never really wanted to, but I feel it's time for me to address it. It's time for me to talk about it. I guess better late than never, I suppose, but I have my reasons for that. And I want to take this time here to kind of let you know my thoughts on Chris Benoit. I know I've given glimpses into it in the past, I've talked about it in the past, but never like all together. Now, the way a lot of you feel today about somebody like, let's say, a Daniel Bryan or maybe a Dolph Ziggler is the way that I used to feel about a Chris Benoit. Chris Benoit was one of my favorites in WCW when he was there. He was also one of my favorites, believe it or not, during the Attitude Era. In an era full of these larger than life characters and interesting gimmicks and personas, Benoit really stood out to me because he represented something different. He kind of was reminiscent to me of a Bret Hart that I actually liked. He was very buttoned down, he was very serious, and there was just always something very appealing about that to me. And over the years of watching Chris Benoit, I became a huge fan of his. And especially as you got to the tail end of the Attitude Era and you went beyond that, I was like you, clamoring for a Daniel Bryan or a Dolph Ziggler or a CM Punk or whoever to get that big spot, that title win, that signature moment. That's what I wanted for Chris Benoit. Because by God, I thought he deserved it because I thought he was one of the best in ring performers they had in the WWE at the time. And I felt like they had done a lot to kind of keep him down, maybe more than they should have, because he had been a guy in WCW and they were trying to establish WWE superiority and all of that bullshit. But I was a huge fan of Chris Benoit. And I think sometimes deep down, that's why I really don't like to talk about Chris Benoit because of what happened, because I was such a fan of his. I'll tell you a little story here. WrestleMania 20. I ordered that pay per view for three reasons. The third reason was to see Eddie Guerrero wrestle Kurt Angle for the WWE Championship. I wanted to see my guy Eddie Guerrero retain his title, get that big signature victory at a WrestleMania. Number two reason was because of the return of The Undertaker, and I knew it was going to be as a dead man. So, between Guerrero wrestling in a WWE title match and The Undertaker's return, that already, was probably enough to get me to actually pay the full price for the pay per view. But the number one reason that I ordered WrestleMania 20, and even before that, a couple months before the 2004 Royal Rumble, was because Chris Benoit was my guy. And, I remember as I watched the 2004 Royal Rumble, it felt like I was going along on this epic journey as Chris Benoit goes from beginning to end and wins the 2004 Royal Rumble. It was to me kind of a validation of all those things that he had done over the years and all the dues that he had paid and all the hard work and dedication he had put in. And it was a reward for me as a fan of his to sit there and say, my guy is finally going to get that opportunity and they cannot deny him. And by the time you get to WrestleMania 20, it's going to be Triple H versus Shawn Michaels versus Chris Benoit in Madison Square Garden for the World Heavyweight Championship. My guy, Chris Benoit, was going to be main eventing WrestleMania 20 with a shot to win the World Heavyweight Championship by either beating Shawn Michaels or Triple H. And part of the intrigue at that time to me was seeing if the WWE was actually going to do it, if they were actually going to do the right thing for business, and if they were actually going to let Chris Benoit win that belt. Because, you're talking about Shawn Michaels, and you're talking about Triple H, and we know how the game mug can be played in the WWE. Hashtag Breakfast Club rules, bitches. So there was some concern, you know. I wasn't sure that Benoit was actually going to get his moment. I thought they were going to get me this close, and then ultimately not have it happen. And they had done that in the past, and that's all fine and good. But now here, WrestleMania 20, 2004, it's going to happen. And then it did happen. It was a great main event. It was one of the best triple threat matches that I personally have ever seen still to this day. And when you factor everything in, and Chris Benoit makes Triple H tap. I mean, not just beat him, he made him tap. It was like, man, the WWE is giving me something. This is as much my moment as it is his moment. Because again, I cannot emphasize again how huge of a Chris Benoit fan I was for years. And finally, at WrestleMania 20, the number one reason that I bought the pay-per-view, and I know damn good and well, I'm not the only one, and a lot of people probably, if I had to guess, would have had that similar approach to me. They wanted to see Eddie defend his title successfully, they wanted to see The Undertaker return, and they wanted to see Chris Benoit end the night as the World Heavyweight Champion. And I got that. And then, of course, I got that tremendous WrestleMania moment that should have lived for all times as one of the truly great heartwarming moments that you could ever get out of professional wrestling as Eddie Guerrero comes out and him and Chris Benoit embrace to end the show. And these two guys that had wrestled all over the world together, they went to the Japans and the ECWs and the WCWs, excuse me, and the WWFs. They were the Radicals, and they had dealt with all this shit. And now here they are, these two guys that have been through hell and back together are the two faces of the WWE. It was a tremendous moment for me, and I know I'm not the only one that feels that way. And what an awesome moment it really was. And then, obviously, the next couple of years go by, and then I find out the news. I'm actually running a Foot Locker store back then in 2007, and somebody comes in and tells me that Monday that apparently Chris Benoit and his family had been found dead. And I'm like, oh, what the hell did he do? Did he put the crippler crossface on his kid? Ugh. Yikes. He did, apparently. And everything changed for me with that. And maybe to a certain degree, you know, you had already had Eddie pass away about a year and a half before that. And now Chris Benoit was gone too. And I think a certain piece of me as a professional wrestling fan wilted away and died forever. I truly mean that. Especially when I found out what allegedly happened. Now, I say this because there is nothing wrong with being a Chris Benoit fan. I was always a Chris Benoit fan. But I cannot sit here and advocate for a guy or talk glowingly about a guy that ultimately murdered his family. Now, people can sit there and say, well, we don't know what happened and and all these different excuses that have been put out there for the years. He had less than a year to live because of his heart condition, all the drugs that he was taking, his mental state. He had the mind of an 80-year-old and da. Well, just because he was that close to death, maybe that didn't excuse killing his wife and his son. Just because he sat there and had the mind of an 80-year-old didn't give him the right to snuff out two innocent victims, two innocent lives. For some of you that'll sit there and say, well, you don't really know what happened. You don't really know what happened. Okay, and maybe we'll never truly know. We'll never truly know what exactly caused him to do what he did. But make no mistake about it. Let's not be naive about it. Chris Benoit did kill his wife, Nancy, and did kill his son, Daniel. And you know, even when it comes to, and I don't mean to minimize this because domestic abuse is a huge problem in this country and around the world, frankly. But it is one thing if he killed his wife. Because as much as we can love our women, sometimes they will know how to push our buttons more than anybody or everybody else. So I could see it. Doesn't make it right. And doesn't mean I condone it. Doesn't mean that I justify it, because I do not. But I could almost understand and see if that was the case. But once you choose to take the life of your own son, you take the life of an innocent child, that's it. I have completely washed my hands of you. There is just no justification for that. There is no excuse for that. And the fact that people in 2014 still try to sit there and say to me, well, you can't take away from what he did in the ring as a competitor. The fuck I can't. The fuck I can't. People do it with O.J. Simpson, and he got away with murder. It diminishes what he did on the football field. He was a Hall of Famer. He's an all-time great running back. But people don't think about that anymore. They don't talk about that anymore. It does diminish his legacy. So who are you to tell me that I need to sit there and still pay respect to Benoit? And these are understood things. We knew he was a fucking great in-ring worker. We knew his title win meant something special in 2004. But that doesn't change the fact that he's a goddamn murderer. And on top of that, a child killer. There's no justification for that. There's no positive spin you can put on that. He killed his wife, and then he killed his son, and like the coward that he was, he ultimately took his own life because he didn't want to deal with what he had done and face the consequences like a man. Sit there and try and tell me all the time. I see it on these videos and stuff, and people talking about, well, you can't take away from what Chris Benoit did in the ring. And why don't you pay more respects to him as an in-ring competitor and all the great things that he did? You want to know why? The real reason why is because it hurts me deep inside as a professional wrestling fan to know what the fuck he did. To know that I sat there and argued for this guy and fought for this guy and backed this guy for years for him to sit there and do that. I can't believe people sit there and talk about whether or not he's going to go into the WWE Hall of Fame. Hell no, I'd never put him in the WWE Hall of Fame. And if you were in the WWE's position, you wouldn't do it either. And nor should you. As far as the whole treatment of WWE trying to erase him from the memory banks and trying to go on without him, I wouldn't promote this son of a bitch either. By doing that, yeah, you could sit there and say it happened and they profited off of him while he was alive. I get that, but damn it all. Ultimately, the guy killed his wife and then killed his son, and then because he was a coward, he killed himself. I wouldn't condone that. I wouldn't justify that. I wouldn't try to excuse that. But some people do. Just because you're a fan of somebody doesn't mean you should sit there and justify and excuse every fucking thing that they do. I'm as much of a Chris Benoit fan as any of you. But that doesn't mean I'm going to sit there and justify being a child killer. The hell is wrong with people on this? Hell no, Chris Benoit never deserves a spot in the WWE Hall of Fame. Hell no, I can't blame the WWE for not actively promoting his name or not talking about him. They shouldn't. Why would you want to associate yourself with somebody that killed his wife and his kid? Why do people not want to sit there and talk glowingly about Chris Benoit? Because he's a fucking murderer. And it hurts me as a wrestling fan to think about a moment like WrestleMania 20. That was supposed to be one of those epic moments of all time. And now is just a tragic scene of all tragic scenes when it comes to the WWE and professional wrestling. To think about the fact that Eddie Guerrero passed away in 2005. And then Chris Benoit did what he did in 2007. And they're both gone. In just 3 years' time, you go from that awesome transcendent moment at WrestleMania 20 to close out the show to both of them are dead and gone. For all of the people that sit there and say, well, maybe if Eddie was around, it wouldn't have happened. Maybe not. Who the fuck knows? Ultimately, Chris Benoit still made the decision to go batshit crazy, kill his wife, kill his kid, and kill his fucking self. How hard is this to grasp? How hard is this to understand? So that's why, even as much as I loved Chris Benoit over the years and how much of a fan I was of his, that's why I don't like to talk about him. That's why I don't sit there trying to give him all types of respect for his great matches and his great work over the years. Because once you sit there and decide to take other people's lives like he did, especially people that depended on him like his wife and his fucking son, and then because he was a coward, he took his own life, like I said, that's it. I'm done with him. To all the Chris Benoit marks that over the years have tried to justify his place in professional wrestling history and tried to excuse what he did, shame on you. I loved Chris Benoit just as much as you did, if not more. But damn it all, some things are more important than professional wrestling, whether you want to believe it or not. To hell with Chris Benoit. That's exactly the way I feel. If I was a WWE, I'd never mention his fucking name ever again. I'd never even let him sniff the WWE Hall of Fame. Why? So that way you can condone killing your wife and killing children? Oh, that's a hell of an example to set for a PG company, isn't it? Man, fuck Chris Benoit. Fuck the people that sit there and still try to defend him almost 7 years later, making all these lousy ass medical excuses and try to sit there and give you this sanctimonious BS of, well, let's not take away from him. No, fuck that. Chris Benoit lost that right and he lost that privilege when he did what he did. I could sit there and say whatever the fuck I want about him. Screw him. Screw him and to hell with them. I hope the maggots have eaten his body raw. I hope his soul is burning in hell. And I don't care if people in the professional wrestling business that were friends of his don't like what I said. The bottom line is there is no justification. He killed his wife, he killed his kid, and then like the coward that he apparently was, he killed himself. And I think sometimes, frankly, I feel guilty about having been a fan of his for all these years. And I'm just not going to defend him. And you're not going to see me talk about him in glowing terms. Accept it. This is my one time to talk about Chris Benoit in any length or any detail. And it's going to be the last time. If you didn't like the video, too fucking bad. People wanted to hear me talk about it, and I did. But ultimately, I don't care what anybody says. For my money, I can't stand Chris Benoit. To hell with Chris Benoit.